internet, my name is Lave and I watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is written and directed by James Gunn, who's been involved in various projects but of course exploded onto the scene with the first Guardians of the Galaxy. He's reunited all of the cast, and after a brief flashback to the 80s, we pick up with the Guardians, who are living off their notoriety from the first film. They're now working as mercenaries, cruising around the galaxy, doing a bit of bad and doing a bit of good. And I will say that this film starts off brilliantly with all of the Guardians involved in a fight with some 80s boogie dancing. It's brilliant. It drops you right back into the action, and I thought this is exactly where I want them to be. But then a spanner is thrown into the works as they run into Ego, Peter Quill's father, played by Kurt Russell, and the film sort of follows the same formula set up by the Avengers, in that the unconventional family are split up. Some go and hang out with Ego on his planet while others are off doing their own thing. And I kind of feel like James Gunn is a victim of his own ambition here. He sets up multiple character arcs which then he has to try and wrap up by the inevitable third act showdown with varying degrees of success, the focus of which is on Chris Pratt's Starlord and his relationship with his father Ego. That was my biggest question going into this, was how are they going to realise this character, which in the comics is a living planet? And I do think that they are successful with it, but they have to resort to exposition in the same way that the Collector explains the Infinity Stones in the first one. You get that in this with Ego's backstory, which does slow down the film, but I completely understand that it's necessary. But what I'm saying is I didn't quite enjoy their character arc as much as some of the others in this film. For example, Gamora and Nebula, their sibling rivalry is still happening and they refer to Thanos a lot. I really liked that. And also, surprisingly, the relationship that develops between Yondu and Rocket. And this just got me thinking that maybe they could have focused in on those particular story arcs and then saved the story arc between Peter Quill and his father for maybe Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I think that would have been a more natural end to the trilogy, but obviously that depends on their involvement in Infinity Wars. And then of course you got Drax the Destroyer, played by Dave Bautista, who was actually the biggest surprise from the first film for me. It's not always a good thing to cast MMA stars, but I thought he did a really good job as the completely literal Drax. But in this one he spends a large part of the first act just doing really forced laughs, and I thought that's gonna get really annoying if he keeps doing that. But then thankfully it stops and he spends more time with a new character called Mantis, which does lead to some really funny moments, but ultimately their story is a bit obsolete. And then of course you got Baby Groot, who is actually voiced again by Vin Diesel. He's so cute, so funny. All of the producers must be thinking, merchandise! Now I just want to reiterate that I did really enjoy this film. It's got all of the ingredients from the first one. The visual effects is fantastic. The world building, literally there are worlds built in this, are rendered really well. I actually did watch this in 3D, which sometimes can hide shoddy green screen effects and sometimes it highlights it. Overall I think it does work, but I want to see it again in 2D before I pass my final judgment on it. But overall the visual effects are very good. It's an 80s inspired psychedelic space adventure. What's not to love? And another thing that was so integral to the first one was the soundtrack, and again Volume 2 is just as good. I particularly liked the dong 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 dong, which I actually think was better used in the trailer, but overall all of the soundtrack choices are great in this. And like the first one, this one is funny as well. I wouldn't say that every joke landed, but certainly on a couple of occasions some of the jokes just felt like they overstayed their welcome. It reminds me of Ron Burgundy and like, ha ha, we are laughing, and then it goes on and on. Like, you really ruin it when you do that, Ron. And I would also argue that some of the jokes were ruined in the trailers, but obviously there are some that weren't. One joke in particular, without spoiling it, that got the biggest laugh from me involved them jumping between dimensions 700 times. That easily got the biggest laugh, as well as some 80s references and cameos. And speaking of the 80s, Sylvester Stallone actually turns up in a cameo in this as well. It's very brief, but any purists of the original Guardians of the Galaxy's comic books are really going to love it. That is solidified in one of the end credit scenes. A lot of people will be like, who the hell are they? I had a suspicion. I didn't know, but I checked online. I was like, wow, that's good. And it's also hinting at another route that this ever-expanding Marvel universe could take, as well as some other end credit scenes. I think there's about 5 of them in this. But actually, the saving grace for me for this film was actually one of the very last scenes, which is surprisingly emotional and from an unexpected source. Of course, I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Overall, it's a good film. So that's my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and pause the video if you want to take a closer look at my enjoyment tracker now. Overall, I did really enjoy this film. Of course, it's not as good as the original Guardians of the Galaxy, but then it hasn't got the novelty of discovering these characters for the first time. The first one, I will say, was surprisingly great. This one, I will say, is predictably good. It's certainly not the best Marvel film, but it's definitely not the worst. I actually think that we've seen the best Marvel film that's going to be released this year, and that's Logan, but then we have got Homecoming still to come, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that Ragnarok is going to be very good, but we'll have to wait and see. Come on, Taika Waititi. But I'm really interested to know what you thought of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Let me know in the comments. Do you think it's going to be the best Marvel film this year? What do you reckon? Let me know in the comments. And thanks very much for watching my review. I really do appreciate it. If you can, give this video a like, and don't forget to share the lave. I am Groot. Subscribe.